Hi, it's Steph and Mike from thisiscolorado.net, Season 1, Episode 3. Welcome to our podcast. On today's episode, we will learn about Denver's early history. We will start with finding gold, move into our small role in the Civil War, a devastating fire, and a ravaging flood. We also touch on early law enforcement and how we came to have a railroad when the Transcontinental didn't come here. All of our sources will be linked in the show notes, of course.
Of course. So, Steph, how are you? How's your week been?
It's been pretty good. Holidays have wrapped up, and I'm happy that they're over, though they were very fun while happening. How about you?
About the same. I took the first week of January off from work, so I'm getting used to not doing anything all day long, and It's rough.
Nice. Rough life.
Yes, very rough.
It'll be rough when you go back to work anyway.
Yes, it will be.
All right, so the first thing we wanted to talk about was our news. So we head on over to the Colorado Daily, and the story is Marijuana Gap Divides Colorado Towns That Sell Pot from Those That Don't.
The article reads, a log-laying village, an interesting David and Goliath dynamic is taking shape across Colorado's burgeoning commercial cannabis sector, with tiny communities friendly to the sale of recreational marijuana, living in the shadow of a large and totally pot shop-free neighbors.
Manitou Springs, just a few miles from Colorado Springs, is the only place within a reasonable distance of the state's second largest city where you can buy recreational weed. On the Eastern Plains, Log Lane Village plays the same role vis-a-vis Fort Morgan, a city 10 times its size.
Garden City, which weighs in at less than 1 square mile, has 4 recreational pot businesses. On the other side of 25th Street lurks Greeley, with more than 96,000 residents, and it has none. And in the mountains, you can pick up a bottle of indica gummies in the marquee resort town of Vail, but less than 5 minutes away, you can shop from a cluster of cannabis vendors in what has become known as the Green Mile.
Morty!
God.
Shush!
Shut it! Lay down. Sorry.
It's okay. We can cut stuff out. It's fine.
Okay.
The community pairings, in all their strange divergence, are the result of Amendment 64, the pot legalization law passed by Colorado voters 3 years ago. The groundbreaking measure specifically left it up to individual towns and cities to decide whether marijuana businesses would be allowed.
Friday marked the second anniversary of the recreational marijuana sales in Colorado. I think it's a great model, said Dave Chapin, Vail's new mayor. It gives towns a lot more say. Anytime you can get things done or get things down to the local level, that's a strength for the community.
So far, the pot partnership between big and small appears to be working.
Crime hasn't increased appreciably, nor has it had significant spillover effects. Additionally, sales tax revenues and economic stimulus have given a shot in the arm of the small communities that really need it. In the larger cities with their more carefully laid out downtown districts, get to keep their civic brand pot-free and family-friendly.
Right on. Jerry Garner, Greeley's chief of police, likens the situation in his city to what existed with liquor half a century ago, when Greeley established itself as a dry town, and Garden City became the destination for those seeking a stiff drink. I see a parallel there, he said.
But that doesn't mean Garner wants to deal with the potential criminal activity associated with what has long been an illegal enterprise. If Garden City is willing to take on the burden, he said that's up to Garden City. Marijuana stores are one more criminal target, and frankly, I don't need one more criminal target, he said.
Yet pot shops as a target for thieves and burglars hasn't proved to be the problem many feared, according to several law enforcement officials interviewed for this story. Even Gardner said he hasn't seen any evidence that Garden City's pot shops are nudging up Greeley's crime stats. So it sounds to me like it's a good relationship. It seems a little symbiotic.
Yeah, it does. There's still the towns like Breckenridge that if you're medical, you can sell in town, but if you're recreational, you have to go out by the airport, which is a mile out of town.
Wow, that's crazy.
And people were complaining, but it's a mile out of town. And I'm like, well, it's a compromise because they could just as easily tell you no. So it's a mile. If you've got to drive 1 mile,
yeah,
it's not going to be that inconvenient, So I take it as a compromise for Breckenridge, but I think a lot of cities and stuff will start doing the same thing.
Yeah, I think time will prove that it's not going to increase everybody's crime and that the war on pot was pretty much a waste of time and energy and money.
Yep.
Exactly. It's not hurting anybody. So anyway,
exactly.
We head on over to the dailycamera.com where we find an article saying Rocky Mountain National Park breaks visitation record. Fort Collins, Colorado. After passing a record-breaking 4 million visitors, officials at Rocky Mountain National Park are looking at how to manage larger crowds.
The Coloradan reports that the park eclipsed 4 million visitors for the first time in its history in November and saw a 21% increase in visitors in 2015 as compared to 2014. Park officials predict an even busier 2016 with the celebration for the National Park Service 100th birthday.
Park spokeswoman Kyle Patterson says officials are not turning their attention to how to alleviate the congestion that the popularity brings. Visitors to the park this summer and fall experienced long lines and wait times at the entrance, filled parking lots, and packed hiker shuttles. So it sounds like it's not going to get any better for 2016. So if you happen to catch yourself out at Rocky Mountain National Park, try not to be a jerk to the other people there.
Yeah.
It's just going to be crowded, so deal.
Yeah, and it's going to, basic rules apply, Pick up after yourself, no trash.
Yeah, pack in, pack out. Don't leave anything there that doesn't belong to the area.
And if you have a picnic or have trash, take a small trash bag with you and keep it in your backpack or something. And throw it in the dumpster when you leave.
Something I learned when I was a kid on, did you ever do the Day on the Prairie? You didn't? Well, I don't know. Some Jeffco schools did it, but they packed us up and they took us to some preserved wetland area.
Okay.
And we got to we were studying the American Indians at the time, so we got to make our own teepees and we had all our own names and all these name tags and stuff. Anyway, they taught us, or what I learned that day was take only memories and leave only footprints.
I think
it applies now.
Yeah, it applies more than ever, I think, now too, with the increasing population of Colorado as well.
Yeah, you got to keep those wild parks wild.
Yeah, and hopefully it'll bring in, the people, the transplants as we call them, that once they get over the shock of the marijuana and everything being legal and all this other stuff, maybe they'll want to stay for the mountains and Rocky Mountain National Parks, man. I don't see any other reason to stay in Colorado as a transplant. If you got the weed and you're over it, then you're like, yeah, because it sure as hell ain't the winters.
Right.
All these people are already complaining. Hell, locals are complaining, and I'm like, geez, this is cold, and I'm tired of it.
It's only January.
But, the mountains are always there. The pot doesn't look like it's going anywhere. And
yeah, hopefully, like we said, other states legalize it and things disperse a bit.
Yep.
Anyway, we're going to head on over to enchantedlearning.com for some facts on Colorado.
So the state abbreviation is capital C, capital O, as if most people didn't already know.
Capital C, capital O. Well, I mean, just in case. Anyway, it covers an area of 104,100 square miles. It's the 8th biggest state in the United States.
Our population is a little over 52 million. No.
5,200,000.
Yeah, 5,200,000. Sorry, as of 2013.
And we refer to ourselves as Coloradans. Our major industries are agriculture, wheat, cattle, and sheep, tourism, especially skiers, mining of gold and silver, oil, finance, and manufacturing.
Those are pretty good industries right there. The major rivers in Colorado are the Colorado River, the Rio Grande, the Arkansas River, and the South Platte River.
Major lakes include Grand Lake, Blue Mesa Reservoir, and one that I've never heard of, John Martin Reservoir.
Yeah, I'm I've lived here my whole life and I've never heard of that last one. So I'm going to look it up and probably go up there and try and do some camping next summer.
There you go. Check it out.
Yep. The highest point is Mount Elbert at 14,433 feet. That's 4,399 meters above sea level.
We have 64 counties. Our bordering states are Arizona, Kansas, Nebraska, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Utah, and Wyoming.
The origin of the name Colorado. The word Colorado is Spanish for the word color red and refers to the muddy Colorado River.
Muddy Colorado.
Colorado.
State nickname is the Centennial State or Colorful Colorado.
The state motto is in Latin, Nil Sine Numen. It means nothing without providence, which I'm not sure what that really means.
Hello, Newman. State song is Where the Columbines Grow, which I have also never heard.
Yeah, I've never heard that song either.
We do have a lot of dinosaur bones found in Colorado, though.
Yeah, the state fossil is the Stegosaurus, a plant-eating dinosaur with plates along its back.
Plates. And he eats. Our state bird is the lark bunting.
I knew that.
I didn't know that. The state animal is the Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep. I did know that.
The state insect is the Colorado hairstreak butterfly.
Oh, I don't even know what that is.
I don't think I've ever seen one.
Right. We have a state fish. Apparently it's the greenback cutthroat trout. I wonder if any of my fisher friends have ever caught one.
Probably. It's probably not referred to as greenback cutthroat trout, though. It's probably just referred to as like a mountain trout or a greenback.
Huh.
But I'm not much of a fisher, so I couldn't tell you.
I wouldn't know either. Our state flower, which I did know, is the Rocky Mountain columbine, which is white and lavender.
I knew that as well. The state tree is the Colorado blue spruce.
Knew that one.
And our state dance, the square dance.
Seriously, we have a state dance and it's a square dance.
It's because
square dance with me.
Because our state is square.
Yeah.
I would assume. I mean, that's the only...
And on a high note, our state gemstone is an aquamarine.
Our founding story of Denver...
is our feature today.
Our feature today. In the summer of 1858, a small group of prospectors from Georgia crossed the Great Plains of the Colorado Territory and made a region-changing discovery at the base of the Rocky Mountains. Gold!
Gold!
And although not much of the precious metal was found, the mere whisper of the word was enough to start a veritable stampede into the region. After all, the California gold rush had occurred just 9 years earlier.
Also in that summer, a group of gold prospectors from Lawrence, Kansas, arrived and established Montana City on the banks of the South Platte River. This was the first settlement in what was later to become the city of Denver. The site faded quickly, however, and was abandoned in favor of other mining camps, such as Auraria, named after the gold mining town of Auraria, Georgia, and St. Charles City by the summer of 1859.
It wasn't long before tents, teepees, wagons, lean-tos, and crudely constructed log cabins linked the banks of the South Platte River as prospectors and fortune seekers poured into the area. They came from all over the country, traveling on foot, in covered wagons, by horseback, and even pushing their belongings in wheelbarrows. Pikes Peak, a 14,000-foot mountain to the south of the mining camp, served as both a landmark and a rallying cry for weary travelers. The Pikes Peak or Bust gold rush was in full force. Participants in the Pikes Peak gold rush from 1858 to 1861 were called the 59ers.
However, gold wasn't the only way to strike it rich in the boom town that was springing up on the banks of the South Platte. On November 22, 1858, General William Larimer, an American politician, soldier, and lawyer, simply staked out a claim of land on the eastern side of Cherry Creek by placing cottonwood logs on the hill overlooking confluence, meaning it's a meeting of two or more bodies of water, on the South Platte River, and across the creek from existing mining settlement of Auraria. He then lay out city streets, and along with associates in the St. Charles City Land Company, began to sell those lots to those arriving after him. The parcels were sold to merchants and miners with the intention of creating a major city that would cater to new immigrants. He named it Denver City in hopes of gaining political favor with the Kansas Territorial Governor James Denver. Larimer hoped that the town's name would help make it the county seat of Arapahoe County, Kansas. What he didn't know was that Denver had already resigned.
Still, the location was accessible to existing trails and was across the South Platte River from the site of seasonal encampments of the Cheyenne and Arapahoe. Denver City was a frontier town, with an economy based on servicing local miners with gambling, saloons, livestock, and goods trading. In the early years, land parcels were often traded for grub stakes or gambled away by miners. A grub stake is basically these people give you the parcel as long as you provide them with a portion of what you discover in the mountains as far as gold or silver.
By the spring of 1859, there were cities on both sides of the South Platte. The situation was tenuous and filled with confusion as tensions between the cities grew and nearly led to bloodshed. Horace Greeley described the rapidly growing metropolis as a log city of 150 dwellings, not 3/4 completed, nor 2/3 inhabited, nor 1/3 fit to be. Finally, a torch-lit meeting was held and on the Larimer Street Bridge over Cherry Creek, for the price of a barrel of whiskey, all other names were dropped, and the settlement in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains came to be known as Denver City.
Just when people began settling into their new lives in Denver, in 1859, a huge gold strike was discovered in the nearby mountain town of Central City. And as quickly as they came to Denver, the fortune seekers packed up and headed to the hills, leaving the city nearly deserted. Gradually, people returned to Denver as they battled harsh weather conditions in the mountains, figuring there were better ways to make their fortune. They were the first settlers to discover and enjoy the mild, year-round climate Denver had to offer and began growing the city as a trade center.
Denver was a wooden town, and the danger of fire was great. The whole city might have been consumed at any time. Auraria narrowly escaped destruction by fire on March 18, 1860, when a large new livery stable belonging to Sumner and Dorset and valued with its contents at $18,000 was entirely consumed. This was the first fire in the new settlement.
May 1860 was marked by the advent of the first daily newspaper, Thomas Gibson's Rocky Mountain Herald. The month of May was also marked by immense immigration, the arrivals numbering nearly 1,000 daily. Together with supplies of all kinds and mills for treating ores, the city grew apace throughout May and June, but the latter month passed without an exciting incidents.
The last half of 1860 was marked only by the continued improvement of Denver, and though very many of the new arrivals returned east to winter, almost all who had wintered here before decided it was more comfortable in Denver than out east and remained. On the 26th of January, 1861, at a local election, the city of Denver polled 1,291 votes, showing a probable population of 6,000. However, opinion was divided as to the correctness of this estimate of population or the count of the vote. At any rate, it showed that East Denver had already outstripped its ancient rival, Auraria, in voting population.
Pretty good.
Pretty good.
The Colorado Territory was created on February 28, 1861. Arapahoe County was formed on November 1st, 1861, and Denver City was incorporated on November 7th, 1861. Denver City served as the Arapahoe County seat from 1861 until consolidation in 1902, and then in 1865. Denver City became the territorial capital. With its newfound importance, Denver City shortened its name to just Denver. On August 1st, 1876, Denver became the state capital when Colorado was admitted to the Union.
Governor Evans and Secretary Elbert arrived in Denver in 1862, and about the same time, the eventful month of May also brought to Denver tidings of the passage by Congress of the Pacific Railroad and Telegraph Bill, an announcement full of promise for the young but thrifty Rocky Mountain settlement.
The prospect of a railway connection east and west was hailed with unbounded delight by the people of Denver, not only for the mere convenience of transit, but for its effect upon all of the material interests of the young community. Travel across the plains by the slow stagecoach or lumbering ox train was even less provoking than the effect of such transportation on the Denver markets, which fluctuated with every change of weather, and often without any sound reason. The non-arrival of the goods train, when it was expected, would put up prices, and when the train did arrive, prices would tumble below cost. An Indian scare would have the same effect.
On July 15, 1862, the first volunteer fire company in Denver was organized. Colorado, having been created as a military district, a provost guard, also known as military police, was mounted in September, and the city of Denver was placed under martial law as far as the soldiers were concerned. Though the soldiers and citizens occasionally came in conflict, the provost guard rendered good service in keeping the city quiet and orderly.
Like any city, Denver suffered its growing pains in its early years. Although sentiments were somewhat divided in the early days of the Civil War, Colorado was only marginally a pro-Union territory. 4 statehood attempts were thwarted largely by Confederate sympathizers in July 1862, February of 1863, and February of 1864, and January of 1866.
Yeesh. Colorado was strategically important to both the Union and Confederacy because of the gold and silver mines, as both sides wanted to use the mineral wealth to help finance the war. The New Mexico campaign from February to April 1862 was a military operation conducted by the Confederate Brigadier General Henry Sibley to gain control of the Southwest, including the gold fields of Colorado, the mineral-rich territory of Nevada, and the ports of California. The campaign was intended as a prelude to an invasion of the Colorado Territory and an attempt to cut the supply lines between California and the rest of the Union. A volunteer army was hastily put together in Denver, and although they were hardly trained and badly outnumbered, they managed to defeat the rebels from Texas at the Battle of Glorieta Pass in New Mexico, saving Colorado for the Union, and that was just the beginning of the challenges the city would face.
The early spring of 1863 was marked in Denver by the departure of Colorado troops for the theater of war in Missouri. When Denver was only 5 years old, on the morning of April 19, 1863, a fire was discovered in the rear of the Cherokee House, then standing on the lot now occupied by the Fillmore Block, corner of Blake and 15th Streets. The alarm was given between the hours of 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. This great fire burned much of Denver's business district to the ground in 1863. In less than 2 hours, the center of the city was blackened waste from Wazee to Holiday Streets, and from Cherry Creek to 16th, except a few fireproof buildings.
Before the town was fairly aroused, the fire was beyond all possible control, and the people turned their attention to saving goods from imperiled buildings. The sands of Cherry Creek were soon covered with heaps of goods from stores and the household paraphernalia of residents.
Unfortunately, those who were attempting to fight the fire were all untrained in the perilous and important duty to which it deserves were dedicated. Services were dedicated, sorry. Additionally, its equipment was incomplete. Daybreak revealed that about 70 buildings had been burned, involving loss of about $250,000. Not a very big sum for the Denver of today, but all too large for the Denver of 1863. The loss of provisions was very great, and the price for materials rose sharply in consequence of the fire.
Many of the brick buildings in Lodo were constructed after the fire and led to the Brick Ordinance. The ordinance requiring all new buildings be constructed of brick or stone was drafted into law on April 20th, 1863, and was in place until the 1940s. Some of the oldest buildings that still exist in Lodo were built immediately following the 1863 fire. These are the long, narrow brick structures built along Lower Blake, Market, and Wazee streets. By Christmas, the burnt district was substantially covered with new buildings, and business was going forward with usual activity.
The streets, which were 80 feet wide, were laid out diagonally, running northeast and southwest, with cross streets at right angles. All the northwest and southeast thoroughfares gave full view of Long's Peak in the distance, and in the winter it is said that the view is particularly fine. The blocks were large, having each 32 lots at 25 by 125. The streets were originally lettered from southeast to northeast, but this lettering subsequently gave way to numbers, by which means F Street became 15th, G Street 16th, etc.
On May 19, 1864, a flash flood swept down Cherry Creek. There being but a little water in the creek at any time, it came to be looked upon as a dry stream, and little attention was paid to it as a watercourse, while many buildings were planted on piles in the very bed of the creek itself, despite early warnings from the Indians who had their winter camps along the creek.
The bridges of the period were low wooden structures, also raised on piles, a little above the sands. It was undoubtedly a wild deluge of water, and it was reported as coming down with the most appalling force and suddenness upon the slumbering city, about the hour of midnight, killing 20 people and causing millions of dollars of damage.
For 4 or 5 hours up to daylight, the floods in Cherry Creek and in the Platte were growing gradually, spreading over West Denver and the Platte Bottoms in the eastern and western wards of town. The adjoining flats next to both Cherry Creek and the Platte were inundated with water, and the buildings were flooded to a depth of 1 to 5 feet. Blake Street was covered to a foot in depth with wetland debris, and the basements of many of its stores were solid cisterns of muddy water. From the Buffalo House to the site of the F Street Bridge on the East Denver Flats was one shining sea of water.
Most of the settlers had to leave their homes and household goods and made their way uptown to escape the inundation. The west side of the city was hit notably harder by the flood. One good effect of the flood was that the washing away of all that remained in the shape of hostile or sectional feeling between the east and west divisions of the city. It also put a stop to all building on the treacherous sands of Cherry Creek, and as West Denver, being on the lowest ground, suffered the most, it subsequently led to the abandonment of many of its business houses, the proprietors establishing themselves to new places in the east division of the city, which rapidly acquired prominence and importance.
Shortly after the flood, the American Indian War broke out, cutting stage stations and supply lines and leaving Denver with just 6 weeks of food. Indians on the plains commenced in action against those in their territory, which ended only with the bloody Battle of Sand Creek on November 29, 1864, when a 700-man force of the Colorado Territory Militia attacked and destroyed a peaceful village of Cheyenne and Arapaho in southeastern Colorado Territory. They killed and mutilated an estimated 70 to 163 people, out of which 2/3 were women and children. The location has been designated the Sand Creek Massacre National Historic Site and is administered by the National Park Service.
Governor Evans, during all the troubled times of 1864 and 1865, was zealous in his efforts to end the wars which were doing Colorado so much damage. He had previously been instrumental in negotiating the Treaty of Canejos, by which the Utes were restricted to the Valley of Gunnison. With their full consent, the enlargement of their reservation followed the Sand Creek affair, when the government made every effort to pacify the Indians. Governor Evans also undertook to treat with the Plains Indians at or about the time the Treaty of Canejos was concluded, but without avail.
Gee, I wonder why they didn't want to talk.
Yeah.
God. At the time, the Plains Indians included about all the northern tribes who ranged north and south at will, and numbered thousands of warriors. Sitting Bull was a leader in those days, and his voice was always for war. He used to say that, while the white men were fighting among themselves, the Indians could unite and drive them out of the country, that the Washington government was played out. Sitting Bull seems to have been a secessionist on a small scale. Anxious to have a talk with these Plains Indians, Governor Evans sent the well-known Elbridge Gerry to invite the chiefs to a conference on the Republican. Gerry, who was well known and universally liked by all the Indians, called him Little Gerry, had no difficulty in communicating with them, but they strenuously and persistently opposed any peace conference. Gerry reported to Governor Evans, who was then in camp on the Republican, waiting for the Indians to come in. Evans advised him to return the Indian camp and ask for a delegation to come in, not to make peace, but to hear what he had to say. The efforts proved unsuccessful.
Contemporary with the Indian excitements of 1864 were a couple of mountain scares proceeding from entirely different causes. A large party of road agents, or guerrillas, as they styled themselves, claiming to be rebel soldiers, organized a raid in South Park. Under the leadership of daredevil by the name of Reynolds. Dun, dun, dun.
It is the Wild West.
The Reynolds raid was long be remembered by old settlers, many of whom have good cause to remember it by their losses afflicted either of property or friends.
Reynolds threatened to sack Denver and actually headed this way, but was stopped at the hands of an attacking party in the Platte Canyon on the evening of July 30th, 1864. Jack Sparks of Gold Run led the attack, supported by the followers from that camp. Instead of making a desperate fight, Reynolds and his gang fled without firing a shot. What a ninny.
Yep.
Leaving their plunder and the dead body of one of their number on the field. A hot pursuit of the fugitives was immediately instituted, during which 5 of the robbers, including a brother of Reynolds, were killed. This settled the guerrilla business in Colorado.
Shouldn't that be pronounced Canyon?
Canyon? Spell check.
You're silly. The summer of 1865 brought with it the grasshopper year, in which everything green was eaten by the critters. No one was prepared for their coming, and there were no methods for fighting them. In consequence, all crops were destroyed, and produce and provisions had to be brought in from other states. Prices were high during the fall and winter, and created the hardest times ever known to the early settlers of Colorado up to that point.
The legislature of 1866 seems to have been remarkable mainly for its perceived virtue. Appalled at the progress of gambling in Denver and throughout the territory, the legislature passed a law prohibiting all manner of games, from Monty down to 7-Up. It also amended all municipal charters so that no town or city could sanction gambling by ordinance or license or even by leniency.
The gambling houses of Denver were among the finest in the country, and the suppers and refreshments served here for the finest.
Finest!
While the hospitality of the proprietors was freely extended to all producers, whether they bought white or blue chips of the game.
No discrimination here, folks.
Nope.
It was not long, however, before the inevitable and always reoccurring demand for these roads to ruin renewed itself in such shape and with such force that public sentiment modified the terrors of the anti-gambling law and left it, like many other prohibition statutes, practically a dead letter. It was used thereafter merely as a restriction.
Open and demonstrative gambling was denied, and the private club rooms were tolerated so that the police always held knowledge in the local underworld. The power to close a gambling house at pleasure, however liable to abuse, was nevertheless a great point gained in the enforcement of law and order, and the city of Denver began to once to take rank with those of the East in respect to efficient government control.
In total, 1866 was a doubling year, and about 300 houses were erected during the building season, some of them being substantial structures. Prices of real estate began to advance in anticipation of railway connection with the East. The grasshopper was not a burden in 1866 as it had been in 1865, and farming operations were resumed with major activity around Denver, which had become the recognized center of business activity. The entries of public lands in 1866, up to November, were 250,000 acres, nearly double that of any previous year, and all entries were made by actual settlers. In 1866, the mines yielded double that production of 1865, and Denver almost doubled in population.
The early hardships only solidified the resolve of Denver's citizens and made them more determined to not just survive, but to thrive. When the Union Pacific Railroad bypassed Colorado on its transcontinental route, Denverites raised $300,000 and built their own railroad to meet the Union Pacific in Cheyenne, Wyoming, Soon after, the Kansas Pacific Railroad crossed the plains to Denver, and when a major silver strike was hit in Leadville in the 1870s, Denver was a boomtown once again.
Oh, that's a circus noise.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Right. So, what did we learn from this little history lesson, Mike?
Well, one, Colorado is an independent state, and Colorados will work hard to do what we want.
Right.
We don't need any outside government telling us how we run our state. We've clearly proven that, not just in the last few years, but with...
At our founding.
Yeah, the founding was basically, that was part of it. So we can govern our own state. We the people, we the citizens of Colorado.
Local works, right.
Yep.
Number 2, floods happen, and when they do, they can absolutely level anything in their path. If the snowpack was of any large amount in the mountains, the spring runoff can strike without warning, including in the middle of the night. Seek high ground quickly.
We also learned that fires also happen, and thankfully our fire departments have advanced in both skill and equipment. So thank a firefighter today.
The last thing we learned was an unfortunate incident of the Sand Creek Massacre.
Yeah.
I never knew that route before.
I didn't either.
And that's just freaking awful.
Yeah, it's just a very dark cloud that kind of hangs over Colorado.
For real, nasty business. Of course, all of our links will be in our show notes. Check out our actual website for this episode at thisiscolorado.net. And we want to know what you guys think so far. This is our third episode?
Third or fourth episode.
Third episode.
Third episode. We are completely and totally new to this, so any feedback that we get is definitely going to help us make this better. We are rookies, but we want to become seasoned vets.
Right.
When it comes to this.
In addition to that, if you have any constructive criticism for us, please share. But we also want to know what kind of things you would like to learn about as far as these little reports go. So connect with us, send us an email. All our contact info is at thisiscolorado.net.
Mike and Stephanie signing off. Thank
See you
later.
Guys.
Have a good one.
Goodbye.
Thisiscolorado.net, helping you create a day to remember.
We are always interested in what you, the listeners, have to say. If you'd like to share your experiences, adventures, destinations, unique Colorado eats, or people causing positive change who are passionate about what they do, tell us more at thisiscolorado.net or leave us a message at 720-733-1231 and we might feature it on an upcoming episode.
When you do what you've always done, you'll get what you always got.
If you found value in this episode, do us a favor and tell a friend. Completing our listener survey is a great way to give us feedback.
All of our links from this episode are in the show notes or at thisiscolorado.net. From one Coloradan to the next, this is Mike and Steph saying, keep it colorful, Colorado.